All right. What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Hope you are all well. It's been a crazy one already this week. All right. See some of the brothers in the building earlier. Shout out to Spain Man for dropping the first word. What up, Chef Mike? Good to see you relaxing with a nice cigar. That's what's up. What's going on, Larry? What's up, Imperfect? Layman's Journal. Shout out to Layman's Journal. Support the channel. Just watched your latest drop, man. Enjoyed it as usual. Y'all support the Layman's Journal channel. Subscribe. Speaking of which, starting this, what day did I decide to do? I think I'm doing it Saturday. Yeah, Saturday evening, 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm going to do a film review, a live film review on Patreon. So for those who are interested in supporting, just go ahead and join the Patreon, the film review section, and you're able to come on up. We could chop it up while we watch a film. And this week's first film we're going to talk about is Brian Banks. So hopefully you guys will support that. So that'll be this Saturday, the next couple of days, 5 p.m. Pacific. And I'll probably put up a community post to remind you. But if you're interested, make sure you subscribe to my Patreon at the film review level and come on through. And if you're already subscribed at a higher level than that, then of course you should already have access. So don't worry about it. Anyway, so maybe one of these days I'll get Layman's Journal on there to join me. Shout out to Ghetto User, Indiana. What's up? LXST, Carl, Raheem, Blood Crow. What's going on? Building Beyond the Chair. What's up? With Brother Graham. Carl Hudson, Leather. What's up? Brandon, appreciate that support. Good brother Ian in the house, supporting as usual. Shout out to Ian Graves. Branford, what's going on? We got Aaron. We got Growth Talk. Y'all make sure you support Growth Talk with Kofa. Shout out to you, brother. Hope you're well. Had a soul. I don't know if I pronounced that right. What's up? Nino, what's going on? Right. Intuit, what's up? Ghetto User with the support. Appreciate that. You know, like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel so we can continue to bring you this independent black male thought. So shout out to Ghetto User for that. Andre 416, what's up? New member. Welcome to the Onyx Brotherhood. You know, Brother Chris, what's up? Yeah. So we're going to get into some interesting things. I am truly hoping that I don't get my stream shut down again. I tried to download this video and I just didn't end up having time. So I'm going to play this clip and I'm hoping it don't give me too much stress. But anyway, that aside, we just going to, get one in tonight, get your thoughts on this, see what you think. This comes off of a conversation that takes place. Now, there's this comedian who I've checked out her first, I don't know if it's her first show, but I think it's her first major show, her stand-up. And, she identifies as a butch lesbian. You know what I mean? And most of the show is what you're going to see in the interview, where she's actually, observing the role, the masculine role. And she's one of the most open to come out and say she doesn't like it. She questions it. And, she's actually, grappling with the weight of it as well. Now, about a year ago, I said something like this to Shay Sharday, and I think she did a little series on butch lesbians who were quitting. I mean, they were basically giving up on dating women because of the expectations. But the interesting thing about it is the social expectations that they're grappling with are the expectations that men have had to live under for generations. And these women who are claiming a masculine role in relationships with women are finding out that juice may not be worth the squeeze, right? So let's see if I can get this video to play, and hopefully it won't be a problem as far as YouTube is concerned. I know about that copyright stuff, so this is fair use. It's not very long, but sometimes it doesn't matter. So anyway, let's see if we can get this to play here.
They just giving us the truth.
All right, 1 second. Let me just kind of. All right. So you can see Sway, right? And he's interviewing Sam J, and they have an interesting conversation. And this is much of her comedy. So let's just start with that. So go ahead and check it out. Give me a 1 if you can hear it. And if not, give me a 0. So here we go.
Sam J is really just giving us the truth. And you said when you got engaged.
Okay, now tell me if you guys heard that. I just want to be sure before we continue on. So let me see if I got some ones. Beautiful. All right, so here we go. Here's the rest of
it. That you didn't realize you have to care every day.
Yeah, I didn't. That's the truth.
Every day.
I did. Meaning, like, I didn't think about, like, when you're really with somebody, bro, that's like a real, like I would just go and I would live my life and I'll come home and she'll be like, you didn't even check if I ate today. And I'm like, why do I got to check if, what are you talking about? Like, you grown, I'm grown, you know what I'm saying? Why wouldn't you eat today? Like, that's crazy to me. Like, what?
Did you wait for me to text you?
Like, what's going on? But then I realized, like, it's about just caring about her. That's really what she's speaking to. She knows she can go eat, but I'm supposed to be tapped in. Like, when I'm eating, I'm supposed to think about her and be like, dang, I wonder if she's eating.
Bring something back home, like, if you at a restaurant. Yeah,
right. That's hard to do when you just out. You know what I'm saying? When you just out here living your life, you like, well,
No, that's a challenge.
So it's a challenge.
Like if you had like a really dope spot, you eating some food, you don't think, let me take
I
it back
used
to go.
be. First of all, you gotta remember, like I live in a masculine space. So first thing I'm gonna say is no dude is thinking about it until they get beat up about it so much that they like, damn, I gotta start thinking like this.
Okay.
You just don't.
That's
you
fair.
don't naturally.
No, it's not exactly that you get beat up with it. This is how we're socialized. You know what I mean? I've been talked to about, putting a woman's feelings and experiences and thoughts ahead of my own. I've been hearing this rhetoric since I was in elementary school. So it's not that it took until a woman got mad at me for not thinking about her, calling her, texting her before it's something I had to deal with. This is something that I've been hearing about my entire life, especially when you grow up in a family full of women. By the time, long before you get your first date or your real interactions with a grown woman, you done been socialized around these ideas. Now, it's a different thing if you've accepted that or you haven't. That's a different thing. But we're not yet talking about whether men have accepted that programming or not. We're simply saying that programming has been introduced to us from childhood. And so what she's saying here, I slightly disagree with, but let's continue.
Think like that because you're out here getting your own food. So you like, yo,
Right.
she can get out here and get her own food. You know what I'm saying? But it's not about the food. It's about the caring. And I had to learn that it was about caring. So you have to care every day. You don't get no breaks from caring about this person. And I didn't know that. You know what I'm saying? I thought I could just take like a Tuesday off. Like you care about yourself, I'll care about myself.
Take a
You a
Tuesday
provider,
off.
you gotta provide the food too.
You gotta care about it all, bro.
So now you see what it feels like with all that shit, huh?
Yes, bro.
Yeah.
Yes,
bro. Okay.
It's not. It is
yeah.
terrible.
Okay.
It is terrible over here, bro.
What?
It is
They
like
got so many expectations.
It's trash out here, son. I want out, bro. I want out. I don't want to do it no more. That's how I know I'm really gay, because I really don't even want to do it no more.
Wow.
Like the job of being a man. Oh my God, dog. I had no idea.
Yeah.
It is It's a lot of pressure. It's 24/7 work. You gotta.
And you in a black man.
Yo.
Oof.
Yo.
Oof.
And I only date black women, so
Wow.
bro, I'm
actually glad they differentiated, because as was pointed out earlier, and I put it on the screen for a reason. I think it was Intuit or Imperfect. I can't remember who said it first. But anyway, yeah, it was Imperfect, right? So Imperfect says, Dr. T, I wonder if you saw the video of the trans man who broke down at just how hard it was to be a man. There have been a number of these kind of breakdowns, especially among white trans men and whatnot. For this show, I'm fixating on black lesbians and black trans, but this has been happening across race. I will extend that. Yeah, you're right. But tonight we're only going to kind of really look at a couple of the examples we've seen. And I misplaced some because I found a couple of videos. I found a couple years ago, and I think the latest was about a year ago, of videos of butch lesbian black women who were like, I'm done. I don't want to do this. I'm being used to pay bills, to take women on free dinner dates, this kind of thing. And it was interesting. And this is why I brought up Shay Sade, because she reached out to me about that. She had a question, because I think I mentioned it on an interview on her show when I was there. And I mentioned to her that it's getting to the point where even lesbian women are checking out, right? Now, Bernard Riley did an interesting show a few days ago where he actually laid out the stats as far as divorce and whatnot. And of course, not only is it intimate partner violence and divorce are the rates higher among the lesbian community than they are in the hetero community. Both rates are higher. Not only do you kind of have that going on, but now you have black lesbians at least being the ones to pull out. Now, the white trans men that I've been seeing, they're breaking down at the difficulty of it. And sometimes, especially when we talk about the person who committed suicide around this, whose name escapes me, but I know you guys will get me in the chat. At the being exposed to male humanity and figuring out that men are human beings that are different from female human beings, like just that observation seems to be shattering some folk. But what I've been hearing from black butch lesbians on social media is this willingness to check out. I'm not saying white and others aren't talking about that, but I haven't seen it. What I've been seeing more of is black lesbians and even trans men, either checking out or being completely caught off guard and unprepared for playing this black masculine role in these relationships. And more than anything, they're not prepared for the expectations that are put upon them. All right. So anyway, it's almost over. So let me play this last portion.
Through it.
You gonna be the spokesperson for guys now?
And somebody need to speak up.
Come on,
somebody need to speak up, because dudes say y'all can't really, because anytime y'all try to do it, like women don't let y'all. Yeah, you getting shot up. They're not gonna let you do it because they're like, we are women. You know what we go do? We got titties. Damn. So you don't even really get to speak on it. But as a junior man doing this shit, I'm telling you, it's ass.
A junior man. You heard that right.
Yo, Sam, get out.
I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it.
Junior
you have no idea that it's a lot. You don't know. Damn. You don't know. It's a lot. It's a lot of downside.
Okay. So, yeah. Very short clip. But I will say this. Her stand-up is much longer. That's not necessarily for the best. I mean, look, I'm not one to dismiss, young black folk trying to do their thing. I didn't find her that funny. I found her interesting. I'll put it that way. If I recommended her stand-up special, I would say more than anything else, it was interesting, because I don't think I've heard someone for that extended a period of time, a black lesbian at that, maintain this type of commentary for the majority of the show. I hadn't heard that before. I hadn't seen that before. So it was really interesting to kind of watch. I didn't find her to be as funny as, I come out of the Patrice O'Neal school. So if you're not making me fall off my chair laughing, I'm just indifferent. But the only thing that made it worth watching is to hear this coming from a demographic that I didn't expect to hear it from, right? Because part of the jargon that we've heard, right, amongst women is that, from some subsets of women, is that, well, since men don't want to cooperate and they're passport bros and they're red pill and even when they're none of that, they're still just not up to par in terms of our expectations, we're going to date each other. Okay. And they, there's very little talk amongst them about the statistics around that, how long those relationships last, so on and so forth. But what I find interesting is to now hear this demographic saying, you know what, we've had a taste of what men do. And I mean a taste. It's not extensive, but she had enough to say, wait a minute. And usually it takes someone who's never done it before, right? Because this is something I've waited for men to really talk about for years. I mean, men, for the most part, this is just something we've done in terms of how we relate to women. And I call it male relationship emotional labor. I'm working on a piece for Oxford as we speak about that very topic. So I'll be publishing it in an Oxford journal soon. But male relationship emotional labor just has to do with the social expectations of men in relationships with women and what it is we're expected to do, what it is we're expected to know, what it is we're expected to just operate off of, even without being given any directives or given any dialogue about what's going on. There's a variety of expectations and pressures that go on men. And the thing about it, as far as male relationship emotional labor, it is an expectation that is never articulated aloud. Yet, she will leave you in a heartbeat if you don't understand it. So it's an interesting thing, right? Where we grow up as men learning about these unspoken expectations. And if you don't get them right, you will have a hard time building relationships with these women. And it's completely unspoken. It's only spoken about when it's not performed well, right? And so that's what Sam J has run across. These series of expectations. And she gives a really interesting example, because one of the first examples she gives, which is fairly nominal, right, is eating a meal and then being browbeaten because she didn't think about whether or not the woman she's with is eating. This is nothing new to men. There was a commercial not long ago that was hilarious to me. It was real subtle. I can't remember. It might have been a Wendy's. I forget what restaurant it was, but it was a dude sitting on his couch, eating his food, watching, I don't know, it was a game or whatever. His lady walks in and she starts to put her hand in his food and he stops her, grabs a bag off the floor and hands it to her and goes back to his TV, right? So not only did he anticipate that she would be hungry, he anticipated that she would try to eat out of his plate. And so he went so far as to order a meal that presumably he knew she already liked and had it ready for her, even though I think of the way the commercial laid it out. She said she didn't want anything prior to that. That's male relationship emotional labor. That's just a subtle example. And there's a whole range of levels, ranging from the innocuous to the life-threatening, right? The expectation that you're supposed to die in protection of her. And this includes women you don't even know. I've told you guys before, I've seen situations in hotels and elevators and on buses where when women feel threatened, they will look around for a man that will protect them and be willing to put his life on the line to do so, even though you don't know him. So it's not just that you protect your girlfriend or your mother or your wife. You're also expected to protect any female in your space. And men chide each other on whether or not we're willing to do that. My issue is I'm not judging one way or another if a brother chooses to do that. What I'm saying is if men are expected to provide these types of services, the very least you can do is discuss what for, why, and what exactly do you want in exchange for that. See, this is part of the issue. People are quite comfortable with male sacrifice as long as they don't have to acknowledge it, talk about it, or talk about what should be reciprocated. And this to me is based on a misunderstanding of the traditional model. We're talking about the traditional nuclear family model, male provider, female housemaker, so on and so forth. We dismiss these ideas now, or so many people do. Others are fighting for various degrees of those understandings to kind of come back through. But the idea is that, and some of these women have really, their interpretations of the traditional model have become cancerous. They believe that you're supposed to provide, protect, and do anything and everything she needs. Put her on a pedestal and she's royalty from the moment you meet her, before your first date, through marriage, divorce, death, whatever it is, right? This is the idea. But what many don't understand is this dynamic in its traditional context was an exchange of services, resources, and support. It was just that there was a difference in the type of service, resource, and support provided to each person. The masculine role, leadership, provisioning, protection, those were services, but they were not extended for no reason or without reciprocation. The reciprocation came back in terms of loyalty, in terms of support, in terms of intimacy, in terms of managing the domestic space, in particular in regard to children. It was an exchange. So when you eliminate the female contribution to that dynamic and then try to socialize a generation of men that's really kicked in with Generation X and younger and tell them that you're supposed to provide all these resources for women indefinitely, it creates a skewed dynamic that doesn't function in the real world. And what you end up with is more and more entitled women, where each generation gets more entitled in terms of this misunderstanding of what it is that a man is supposed to do in a traditional context. And you get a population of men that begin to withdraw to varying degrees, right? They begin to withdraw because they're not being heard, they're not being understood. Then by the time you get to a level where, there's a platform where men begin to push back and respond, now that changes everything. So you got young men who are hearing older men talk about this. You got older men that are hearing younger men talk about this, and those older men never realize that they don't have to do it. So you're seeing all kinds of social withdrawals that people are not prepared for because they base their ideas about what men are supposed to do on assumptions, misunderstandings of the traditional model. In other words, men have become receptacles where we're just supposed to give indefinitely and shut up. And men are pushing back on it, and women are mostly unprepared for that. So here, in this particular instance, you have butch lesbians stepping in. Now, mind you, some of what I've heard from them over the last 10 years, 15 years is, we're a better option anyway, right? There's been this kind of subtle competition between some butch lesbians and men, right, for the same women. So it's interesting to see when they get in the position that you're starting to hear more of them. And I'm sure the economic environment ain't helping matters, right? Where it's like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to give this, and this in this relationship. What do I get for this? And it's funny because if you got lesbians who are coming to this conclusion, are people finally starting to understand what it is men have been grappling with? Well, it's interesting to say. So again, talking about male relationship emotional labor, MREL, we're talking about a very particular, because emotional labor can be extended to anybody, from anybody. Emotional labor is all over the place. But what I'm specifically talking about is the type of labor socially expected from men that doesn't get discussed. If anything, people have gotten so haughty in this conversation that they don't believe that men provide any emotional labor whatsoever. It's become quite comfortable, most particularly for feminists, to talk about labor as the sole purview of women. Thus, the subtle subtext is that men don't do it, can't do it, don't know how to do it, don't care to do it, and thus women are burdened with this extra task of being emotionally present and providing this labor to this Cro-Magnon man that can't respond. When really what it is that men and women provide each other different types of emotional labor. We've only popularized what women have identified as the emotional labor they want, but we haven't actually talked about what men do, which is a very different dynamic. So when I do that piece, I might share it here if you guys are so inclined, and we'll go into that. Now, before I go into the next stage of this, let me back up a little and acknowledge some of these super chats. If I didn't acknowledge Brandon out first, I apologize. Shout out to Brandon for that. Shout out to Ghetto User again. We got another one from Urban Naturalist. What's good? Appreciate that support. Shout out to Gavin with the super sticker. Much appreciated. Mr. FBA. Appreciate that. He said, disprove women know our hardship and ignore our pain. Yep. Shout out to J100 for the super sticker. Much appreciated. Hurricane. What's good? Appreciate that support. We got Amari in the building. Appreciate that. Dar. Good to see you. Ain't seen you in a second. What's good with you? We got Be Easy Glover. Says, I love you, Dr. T. Here's tuition. You're a leader in this space. Your numbers will begin to show it. You deserve all the rewards that come. Much appreciated, good brother. Thank you. And shout out to David White for the $50 holla. Appreciate that, man. Thank you. So let's get into the second part. So again, if you're interested in checking out more Sam J, like I said, I didn't find her to be funny, but she goes into more depth in her stand-up. And I will say this, something she says in her stand-up that she didn't say in this quick interview was that she said it several times that she was ready to go back to men, although she didn't use the term men. She was talking about, phallices, but it was interesting to hear her say, she said because she kept reiterating that she was so tired of this dynamic, she's ready to go back to men because men were so much easier. And I thought, this is really a trip to hear, right? This is really a trip to hear. Not only are we talking about an observation around the emotional labor that men are expected to provide, that, you have some of these women that are tired of providing and being used and exploited for, but they're actually toying with the idea of going back to men because it pays. Let's be real about it. But anyway, so yeah, if you check it out, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Or if you just want to expound on respond to what I just said, either way, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. Now, let me be clear. I'm not bashing trans folk, LGBT. I'm not bashing anyone. This is an observation about what men provide that I believe most of society takes for granted. And in the Black community, there's an extra load because we're dealing with a community that has a history of dysfunction, underdevelopment, being excluded from a lot of what's taking place in terms of the largesse that we've seen other racial groups. We're dealing with all of those factors. And a lot of the frustration of that is left at the doorstep of Black men. So the emotional labor we're supposed to provide continues to grow the more entitled and frustrated other demographics in the community become. So that said, I'm looking at what those expectations look like and the amazing sacrifice that I've seen men make and don't even blink about. But somehow it's through lesbians and trans folk that we're seeing an appreciation, or at least an acknowledgement of the male sacrifice that we don't hear. This is another piece I want to share with you. Now, this is a couple years old, and I actually included it in an academic paper I wrote some years ago, my major paper where I was dealing with the Black male dual economy. And I think I can't remember if I published it last year or if it's still coming out. I have to check my latest CV update, but I wrote a paper called, I think it's called Living in a Fractured Reality, and I was talking about the Black male dual economy. And I was basically talking about how Black men pay an undue tax. If anything, we live a life where the prices are wholly different for our social interactions, for our advancement, doesn't matter what it is. it's different for us than it is for others, most particularly others in our own demographic. So these are not issues that are just Black issues. These are Black male issues that differ. So our access to different institutions, our access to being able to move up the class ladder, this is very different for us than it is for other groups, and that includes women and LGBT. So I included this paper called Crossing the Divide, or excuse me, this article. This is from the Washington Post. And so you can just look up Crossing the Divide, and it's by Tara Bahrampour. I know I probably butchered that, but yeah. This came out 2018. Crossing the Divide. Let me see if I can move this over a little bit. There we go. Do men really have it easier? These transgender guys found the truth was more complex. Shout out to Cam from TMR Radio. Okay, he says, male emotional labor. Appreciate the work you are doing to expand the lexicon. We have been at a disadvantage because most of this started in academia and women were coming up with the language. Glad to see and hear men like yourself tackling this. Much appreciated. And that's been the problem. That's exactly been the problem. And I sat in those classes learning that stuff, and I noticed that we weren't included, but it took me years to really understand to what degree we weren't. So we have to actually begin to frame this stuff for ourselves. But anyway, so again, Crossing the Divide, Tara Bahrampour. And I'm going to scroll down to a section where they interview one gentleman or one trans man. This is Tristan Cotton, 50 years old, Berkeley, California. And let me see. Matter of fact, before I read it, I'll give you an image so you can see that's Tristan, right? So Tristan is, as I understand it, was biologically female or is biologically female, transition to manhood. I don't know. This is 4 or 5 years old, so I don't know what Tristan's situation is now, but you can see who we're talking about. And the reason I keyed in on this portion, because this article, they interview several different trans men, but this one is actually dealing with somebody who's grappling with Black manhood and how Black manhood is perceived. Because remember, we're talking about, one of these kind of people that you wouldn't be able to, for the most part, look at this person and tell that this is a trans man. So it's not, there are those that we can look at and say, okay, there's a question mark there that can go either way. But then there are those that look like, as we understand men look. In so doing, when you do that and present as a Black male, society responds. And so it's not often that we get to hear from people who live life up to a certain point one way, most particularly as a woman, and then after a transition are visibly seen by the world as Black men. And it's real interesting. There's also another film I've shown in class. Oh man, I have it. Dang it. I'm blanking on the name of it right now. Well, if you guys ask me in the comment section after this video is done, I can pull up the name of the film, but it's actually a whole film interviewing trans Black men about their experiences. And I'm only posting this or talking about it because I find it extremely interesting how you got people who will come into these expectations, grapple with it, and just be reeling at the difficulty and at the amount of sacrifice expected from Black men. And we ourselves are so used to it, it's hard to talk about. It's hard to get some brothers to even acknowledge the kind of load placed on Black men, or sometimes the incredible amount of work we've done to the point where we even take ourselves for granted. But anyway, so this is this section of the article is entitled "I'll Never Call the Police Again." Again, Tristan Cotton, 50 years old, Berkeley, California, professor of gender studies, Cal State University Stanislaus, and editor of Transgress Press, which publishes books related to the transgender experience. Apparently, Tristan transitioned in 2008. So Tristan says, life doesn't get easier as an African-American male. The way that police officers deal with me, the way that racism undermines my ability to feel safe in the world, affects my mobility, affects where I go. Now, understand something. If Tristan was already African-American, is this just a matter of racism? Because if it was, this would have been no change, right, for Tristan. But somehow it makes it to the point where it needs to be mentioned because the racism, as Tristan calls it, has changed in terms of how it's presented. So let's continue. Other African-American and Latino Americans grew up as boys and were taught to deal with that at an earlier age. I had to learn from my Black and brown brothers about how to stay alive in my new body and retain some dignity while being demeaned by cops. One night, somebody crashed a car into my neighbor's house, and I called 911. I walked out to talk to the police officer, and he pulls a gun on me and says, "Stop, stop, get on the ground." I turn around to see if there's someone behind me, and he goes, "You." I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but that's an interesting thing, because I don't know too many brothers where a cop will pull a gun on you and you look around. I mean, usually it's not supremely surprising that a cop is pulling a gun on me. It's just, it's not something that happens to me every day, but I highly doubt I'm going to turn around. But anyway, let's continue. Get on the ground. I'm in pajamas and barefoot. I get on the ground and he checks me. And afterward, I said, "What was all that about?" He said, "You were moving kind of funny." Later, people told me, "Man, you're crazy. You never call the police." Right? So even the assumption to call the police in the face of an emergency, right, changes everything. Let me see if I can make this a little larger. All right. So Tristan continues. I get pulled over a lot more now. And this is something I've had to prepare my son for. Right? I do think, having your own wheels, being able to, get up and go at your own, whenever at your own whim is an important stage in manhood. It's part of our capacity to be free and move around. But at the same time, comes with a cost. Right? So getting pulled over a lot, especially when I was younger, because age is a factor, but it still happens. You are going to be more likely to be pulled over. So to not know that is interesting to hear. I got pulled over more in the first 2 years after my transition than I did the entire 20 years I was driving before that. That is deep. That is deep. This is what we mean when we talk about anti-Black misandry. It's not something that just comes from Black women in terms of a low boiling contempt for Black men. When we talk about anti-Black misandry, we're talking about it almost institutionally. Right? We're talking about it from the larger society. We're talking about it from within families, within community. It can come from anywhere, but it's about the hatred, the fundamental hatred of Black men, and the many ways that expresses itself, in many ways that gets expressed. It can happen in terms of policy. It can happen in terms of situations like this, right? So I think it's incredibly interesting to hear Tristan say, "I got pulled over more in the first 2 years after my transition than I did in the entire 20 years I was driving before that." So, again, when I say that Black men and women live very different lives, despite that we're in this, same context together on one level, that speaks to the particularity of the hostility toward Black men. So again, to hear this coming from someone who is presents as a male at this point and is seen by the world as a male, this is an interesting observation because it really shows you the difference in how we're treated, right? It continues. Before, when I'd been stopped, even for real violations like driving 100 miles an hour, I got off. Wait a minute. Hold on. Before, when I'd been stopped, even for real violations like driving 100 miles an hour, I got off. Word? Anytime I went over 100, I knew what that could mean. I knew it. And I accepted it while doing it. But there was never a moment where I didn't know what could happen. I'd have boys that had gone through that as well. So it was never a guess. But for this person, again, when presented as a woman, wasn't even an issue. Tristan says, in fact, when it happened in Atlanta, the officer and I got into a great conversation about the Braves. Now, the first two questions they ask are, do I have any weapons in the car? And am I on parole or probation? Right? Difference in that experience. So again, when I say that Black men and women live different lives, people take it how they may, but maybe when they hear it from others, it'll register. I'm not sure. So it continues. Race influences how people choose to transition. I did an ethnographic study of trans men and found that 96% of African American and Latino men want to have surgery, while only 45% of white respondents do. Wow. That's because a trans history can exacerbate racial profiling. When they pat you down, if you don't have a penis, it's going to be obvious. Or if you're a trans woman and you have a penis, that becomes obvious. If they picked you up for popping a wheelie or smoking weed, if they find out you're trans, it can be worse for you. There are also ways in which men deal with sexism and gender oppression that I was not aware of when I was walking around in a female body. A couple of years after my transition, I had a grad student I'd been mentoring. She started coming on to me, stalking me, sending me emails and texts. My advisor and the dean, both women, laughed it off. It went on for the better part of a year, and that was the year that I was going up for tenure. It was a very scary time. I felt very worried that if the student felt I was not returning her attention, she would claim that I had assaulted her. Now, this is interesting. So this person, after being visibly presenting to the world as a black male, is now concerned about a student, right, impacting whether or not this person can get tenure, right? Being worried about false allegations. But even the way that this person is explaining it, you know that this was never a concern that they had prior to this, right? So it seems like it's easier to understand men when you present as one, right? Let's see. I felt like as a guy, I was not taken seriously. I had experienced harassment as a female person at another university, and they had reacted immediately, sending a police escort with me to and from campus. I felt like if I had still been in my old body, I would have gotten a lot more support. But it actually takes a transition and surgery, for this to become apparent. But when men say it, nobody wants to hear it, right? Except hopefully at least other men. Being a black man has changed the way I move in the world. I used to walk quickly or run to catch a bus. Now I walk at a slower pace, and if I'm late, I don't dare rush. I am hyper aware of making sudden or abrupt movements, especially in airports, train stations, and other public places. Now, how many black men have become so familiar with how you're seen that you do these things on automatic, right? But again, we've been socialized to do it. We understand this. We understand it could come at the cost of your life if you don't understand this, even on a subconscious level. But it's interesting to hear the responses from someone who's never had to think that way, because it highlights for us what we take for granted about how much we already navigate, how much we already know, how much we already experience that we don't even think about. Let me see. I avoid engaging with unfamiliar white folk, especially white women. If they catch my eye, white women usually clutch their purse and cross the street. While I love urban aesthetics, I stopped wearing hoodies and traded my baggy jeans, oversized jerseys, and colorful skull caps. Hold on. I think I skipped too far. For close-fitting jeans, khakis, and sweaters. These changes blunt assumptions that I'm going to snatch purses or merchandise or jump the subway turnstile. The less visible I am, the better my chances of surviving. An interesting thing when we were looking at the comic Jay or whatever. So Jay is apparently Jay hasn't had surgery. Jay is just a lesbian who presents like a man to some degree. This is somebody who's actually, from what I gather, had surgery. So here we go. So, but it's not foolproof. I'm an academic sitting at a desk, so I exercise where I can. I walk to the post office to mail some books, and I put on this 40-pound weight vest that I walk around in. It was about 3 or 4 in the morning, and I'm walking back, and all of a sudden, police officers drove up, got out of their car, and I stopped, and stopped. I had my earphones on, so I didn't know they were talking to me. Now, this has been my biggest fear with my son. Whenever he would walk home from school with his earphones, whether or not they would be, something would happen before he heard it, and, it'd be on. So this person is going through something similar. I had my earphones on, so I didn't know they were talking to me. I looked up, and there's a helicopter above. And now I can kind of see why people run, because you might live if you run, even if you haven't done anything. This was in Emerville, one of the wealthiest enclaves in Northern California, where there's security galore. Someone had seen me walking to the post office and called in and said they saw a Muslim with an explosives vest. One cop, a white guy, picked it up and laughed and said, "Oh, I think I know what this is. This is a weight belt." It's not only humiliating, but it creates anxiety on a daily basis. Before, I used to feel safe going up to a police officer if I was lost or needed direction, but I don't do that anymore. I hike a lot. And if I'm out hiking and I see a dead body, I keep on walking. I'll never call the police again. Right? So, interesting. Interesting. So, in both contexts, whether we're talking about a butch lesbian or whether we're talking about a trans man, trans black man, we're seeing observations about men's sacrifices, many of which that, men have taken for granted for so long that we don't even talk about. These are just social expectations that we live and don't think through much of the time. And I want us to. I want us to actually be cognizant of the sacrifices we make and how far those sacrifices have required us to either give up our humanity or perform it in such an alien way that we don't even think about it anymore. Anyway, but I still found it interesting to see the kind of link between those two presentations between Sam J and Tristan Cotton on Black Manhood, right? So there's a kind of empathy that's kind of coming out in certain respects as far as what men experience. But the irony is it's not something that generally comes from heterosexual black women. This is something that comes from distinct groups who are experiencing and exploring black masculinity, only to find that it can be life-threatening if you do. Now, this article is limited to police interaction, but we could have a long conversation about interactions that go way beyond the police. Not to say the police aspect isn't important, but it's not limited to that. This article only fixated on that. But the threat that men pose, or at least are perceived to pose, right, go way beyond that. Now, I was intrigued at the section where Tristan is talking about the student. And this goes to something my mentor used to tell me all the time back when I was studying under him in undergrad, that your career is in the hands of every 17-year-old girl that walks in your office, right? So it took until this transition, this surgeries and so on and so forth, before Tristan, as an academic, began to understand the danger of women and what they can do, even as students with no presumable power. They can end your career with a false accusation, right? That's not limited to students by any means, but it's interesting to see Tristan come to grips with that and find himself powerless about what to do. And even having, the administrators, laugh at him, right? Laugh. Yeah, it's interesting to see. So that being said, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Like I said, this is going to be a short one. I just wanted to drop this in, but really, I want to get what you guys think, what your experiences have been, what you've seen, what you witnessed, family members, friends, strangers. What are your thoughts about the expectations on you as black men? And how you have people who've never known about those expectations until very recently, when they stepped into a masculine space and found out the hard way. It ain't easy. Right? I want to know your thoughts on that. Appreciate y'all coming through tonight. So again, y'all have a good one. I will holler at y'all soon. Peace.